This is a video that I've wanted to put together for a little while now. I'm finally getting around to it. There's a lot of folks that I know who are employed as PSOs. Those people are protective security officers. They're federal contractors with FPS. And these people carry firearms for work, and they need to go at least twice a year to requalify with these firearms. And they shoot a set course of fire on a qualification, and they achieve a certain score and they pass. And if they don't, they're pulled off the contract temporarily. In addition, I believe this is actually the same course of fire that FPS officers shoot, with the possible exception that the distance at which they fire the last few strings are actually farther away. Now, before we get started, a little bit of a disclaimer. Remember, the firearm safety is solely your responsibility. Everything you do has consequences. Also, remember that while I might be a firearms instructor, I'm not your firearms instructor. So take everything you read or hear or see from me or anybody else with a grain of salt, because free advice is often worth less than what you paid for it. So the best thing I could say is seek out professional instruction to make sure everything you're doing is proper and safe. A couple of things I want to say right off the bat. The first thing is that you need to be aware of your own skill level, and I know that you are. If you know that you might have some sort of difficulty achieving a passing score, then you need to do something about it well in advance of your actual qualification. If you wait until the night before to practice some dry firing and drawing from a holster, or you go 1 or 2 days before your qualification to the range to fire off a couple boxes of ammo, that's probably not going to get the job done. You know the distances that you're going to be firing at, you know the targets that are going to be used, you know how much time you're going to have, you know what the course of fire is going to entail, you know roughly when you've got to go back to qualify. Most of you go home with the handgun and your holster every night. There should be no reason why you should be unprepared to pass, since there are no surprises. Now, I know that no one wants to watch a video of people berating them, so I'm going to spare you the lecture. However, I will say that achieving a passing score on this course of fire is not difficult. You've done it before or you wouldn't have the job. And the reality is that you're indirectly getting paid taxpayer dollars to know how to use your gun, so it's in everybody's best interest for you to actually know how to use it. Additionally, remember that a qualification is nothing more than a standardized test. It measures your ability to shoot that course of fire. It doesn't mean that you're a good shooter or you're a bad shooter. Although, if you're able to shoot it well or you can't shoot it at all, it's probably a decent representation of your basic handgun abilities. One thing that it's not is real life. Don't ever confuse the course of fire with real life, because certain physiological and psychological things happen to the human body when it's placed under the tremendous stress of a life or death encounter, and there's just really no way to know for sure how you would react. Some people advocate things like running or exercising to get your heart rate up during training, or shooting on the clock to add stress. And these activities might be better than nothing, but they don't lead to the same adrenaline dump that you get when someone's trying to kill you. So because of this, never forget that even shooting a perfect score on the qualification alone doesn't mean that you're prepared to defend yourself. So also remember that this course of fire is not tactically sound. And what I mean by that is, let's just say, for example, I don't know how the folks running your qualification handle gun malfunctions, but if they require you to stop and raise your hand to let them know that you had a malfunction, that's obviously not the type of habit you want to get into in real life. Jams happen, so when you're training on your own, you should clear it and you move on. During your qualification, however, if they tell you to do that, then it's in your best interest to do it. Remember that you're always going to know how many rounds to fire in a string. You're going to be standing from a starting position. You have adequate lighting. You're wearing hearing protection. There's zero movement involved. You don't engage multiple attackers. The targets are always squared up to you, and bullets are only going in one direction. So obviously this is not real life. It's a best case scenario. If you can't pass this course of fire in this best case scenario, you're going to have problems if you were ever misfortunate enough to encounter something in real life. Remember, once again, that this is a test, and the tips that I'm giving you are designed to maximize your chances of passing the qualification and continuing to earn your paycheck. They shouldn't be confused with what you're going to do in real life, because a lot of them are the exact opposite that you want to do on the job. For example, taking 20 seconds to fire off 4 rounds and kneeling halfway in between at a target, it's not a great idea. So keep in mind, this is no substitute for actual legitimate training. The first tip that I can give you is that the course of fire involves something called par time. So what this means is that you're given a time limit. Shots that go over the time limit don't count, but if you shoot at a blistering speed, that's not going to give you any bonus points. So remember that it's in your best interest to take as much time as you need to get accurate hits, as long as you don't get over. You should get used to what 3 or 5 or 10 seconds feels like. You should get accustomed to firing in a set cadence that allows you to use nearly all the time that you're given if you need it. Going over is a horrible idea, but shooting a 10-second string in 3 seconds and missing half the shots is just as bad. Another tip that might buy you some time, some ranges have targets that turn to face you at the start of the string and then they turn away when your time's up. Other ranges, somebody's going to be blowing a whistle or running a shot timer that has a loud buzzer on it. So remember, whatever the case is, don't wait for the buzzer to stop or the whistling to stop or the target to be fully exposed before you start drawing your handgun. Your time starts when the buzzer starts or when the target starts moving. Some of those buzzers or whistles are going to take half a second or longer, and sometimes it takes just as long for a target to actually fully turn and face you. If you wait until the sound ends or the target stops moving before you start your draw, you've wasted all that time. You don't want to jump the gun, but you don't want to hang around wasting time either. One of the easiest ways that I know of to improve your score is being aware of the characteristics of the target that you're going to use. As far as I know, everyone is going to be using the same Immigration and Customs Enforcement 1960s gangster-looking target. And this target officially is scored with an X-ring in the center. Surrounding that X-ring is a 5-point ring that includes part of the head. Outside of this is the forering, and everything else within the border of the bad guy is worth 2 points. Obviously, bullets that hit outside of the silhouette or that miss the paper completely are worth nothing. If the bullet breaks a line, typically it's scored as the higher value of the 2 bordering areas. If you notice on this target, the lines that border between scoring rings is actually pretty thick. So that works to your advantage. Now, unfortunately, though, I've seen or heard of this target scored a number of different ways. Sometimes everything within the forering is considered 5 points, and the rest of the target is worth 3. Other times, the rest of the target is worth 2. Sometimes when it comes to the head, there's this imaginary line that separates the head from the body for the strings that require headshots, and usually hits inside the scoring ring are worth 5 points, and those outside of the ring, but that still fall within the outline of the head, including the hair, are worth whatever the lowest point value is on the target, either 2 or 3 points. However, some people grade these shots as total misses and worth nothing. The reality, however, is that none of this matters when you're shooting. You're not going to be aiming for scoring rings, and you don't care what's worth what. That's all left for the end and for the person who's going to be scoring. If you make your hits count to the best of your ability, and you shoot well enough to pass, then you're going to pass. The lines are just some arbitrary dividing point between zones, and the placement of this is just something that someone decided a long time ago. What you're aiming at is you're going to be shooting at a point, literally a single one-dimensional dot on the target. There's this saying that says, aim small, miss small. What that means, if you're going to miss a point in space by 6 inches, you're going to be 6 inches from the center of the target. But if you generally aim for the 5 ring and you miss by 6 inches, you're going to be somewhere out here. If you're aiming for anywhere within the bad guy and you miss by 6 inches, now you're off the target. Remember, you pick a tiny dot for aiming and you try to hit that dot. The rings don't mean anything to you. So, where should your aiming point be? And here's where the target is going to fool you. If you look closely at the alignment of the scoring rings, you'll see that they're not centered in the target. The X ring is not in the middle of the body, and the head ring is not centered in the head. If you split the difference based on the outer outline of the silhouette, you're going to be aiming at the wrong point. So instead, you have to split the difference of the scoring ring. So for the head, what you're going to see is the aiming point should be about here. This is just to the side of the bridge of the nose. So for the body, the point of aim should be about here, roughly between the two hairy knuckled fingers on his left hand. If you just generally aim for the center of the chest area, you might get a solid real-world hit to the heart. However, that's not what we're shooting for during this qualification. And remember, your goal here is not real-world performance. It's to pass the qualification. This qualifier's course of fire gives you a lot of advantages if you know how to recognize them. One of the most important advantages you're going to have is the fact that you're not going to be moving at all. Therefore, it's in your best interest to pick a proper shooting stance before you even begin to draw your gun. Now, keep in mind this might look silly, and it's possible that the person who's proctoring your qualification could give you a hard time if you're standing in a shooting stance instead of just standing relaxed. But until he does, don't worry about it. Your feet should be a little more than shoulder width apart. Your knees are going to be slightly bent. You're going to have a slight forward lean to your upper body. Then we come to the point of where your hands should be. And that kind of depends on what you're allowed to do. It's highly unlikely, but if you're allowed to start with your hand on your gun, by all means, start with your hand on your gun. Start with your finger on your retention strap. But if you're not able to do that, then start with your hands either to your side or somewhere near your belt buckle. That's a reasonable place to stand. If possible, I like to have the inside part of my arm touching the gun somewhere. This is something that I personally try to do in real life because it's a great indicator if someone is sneaking up behind you and trying to snatch your pistol. And it's way more reasonable to do this than walking around with your hand on your gun all the time. For the purposes of the qualifier, however, what this does is it helps orient your brain to the exact location of your gun. If the inside of your arm is touching your gun, your brain knows, okay, that's where the gun is. At this point in time, you should be able to find your pistol just like second nature, but having your arm on it a little bit gives you a little extra accuracy to your awareness. There's this concept that everyone should put into practice. It's called natural point of aim. Now, everybody's physiology is a little different. But what it means is that each of us has a spot where the gun naturally wants to point when you draw it. In order to find yours, you can practice at home. At this point, I shouldn't have to remind you, but in case you aren't aware of common firearm safety rules, this absolutely needs to be done with an unloaded gun, no ammunition, no loaded mags, anywhere in your duty belt, anywhere in the room. You stand in front of an inanimate object and you use that as a target. You take a good shooting stance, you draw your gun, you point your empty firearm at the target. It should be pointing generally where you want to aim it. So now you reholster the gun and you try it again with your eyes closed. Once your gun is at full extension, you open your eyes and notice where the pistol is pointing. Now, is it a little to the left? Is it a little to the right? If it is, you adjust your feet and your body slightly to compensate. Then you repeat this. After a couple of times, the gun's going to be pointing at your natural point of aim. Take note of how you're positioned and where this point of aim is. Ideally, this is how you want to stand in front of your target at all times during the qualification course of fire, with the exception of the first couple of shots fired from retention. What this means is that your body's automatically going to want to point to the center line of the target, and it's going to give you an advantage during your qualification. Now that you have your stance down, you're going to want to work on your grip. Gripping the pistol is simple. You put your strong hand up around the grip with the webbing of the hand as high up on the pistol as possible. Your trigger finger at this point should be able to comfortably reach the trigger without stretching or crunching down. There should be a reasonable amount of space left on the opposite side of the grip to allow you to place some of the palm of your support hand into the pocket. Camp the support hand at a downward angle, and this will lock your wrist. You point the support thumb forward toward the target and you lay your strong thumb on top of it. It doesn't have to be straight along the side of the gun, and in fact, on certain pistols, this will cause you to ride the slide lock lever and cause it to fail to lock back when the magazine runs dry. Later on, when I shoot a string of fire that involves reloading on the clock, you'll see that the gun I'm shooting, which is a SIG P226, which has a slide lock lever pretty far back, actually doesn't lock back when the gun runs dry. I left it in there so you can see it when I'm shooting. Some people like to tuck one thumb over the other thumb. Personally, I find that this makes for less effective grip, but it might be different for you. So try it however it works out for you, how you feel like you can best control the gun. That's best. You should be applying firm pressure with both hands. The pressure should be as strong as you can make it without overly tensing up the firearms or your trigger finger, which could make movement difficult. I plan to make a more in-depth video on this topic, but there's a number of good videos on YouTube, and you can seek them out and find out what to do as far as improving on your grip. Just remember that bullseye shooters will often say they need to hold the gun very loosely, and that works for them. The issue here, though, is we're going to be controlling recoil. We want to shoot quickly and accurately. If you don't grip the gun with a reasonable amount of strength, you're not going to be able to control the recoil. It's not a death grip where you can't move your trigger finger, but it's got to be really firm. Chances are you're not holding the gun strongly enough. Now, let's move on to the draw. I've heard every complaint under the sun about why someone failed the qualifier and was pulled off the job, and a lot of those complaints center around this retention device you have in your security holster. Some people even complained that they're required to reactivate it between strings of fire. It's there for a purpose. You're never going to man your post with retention devices defeated, so what the key is here is you need to practice drawing your unloaded pistol at home and defeating that retention device and making sure that it becomes second nature. Do it a couple times each day before and after getting dressed for work. And you should be able to defeat that retention device on your holster and grip the pistol in one single move. It takes too much time to move to unsnap and then you move to grip. What you need to do is unsnap as you move your hand into the proper gripping motion. If you don't have a snap on your holster, but you have some sort of hood, you need to thumb down the hood as your hand is coming down on the grip of the gun. Once again, there are different ways to defeat retention devices. Every holster is different. Some of them have thumb straps. Some of them have thumb and finger straps. You can see here, this is a Safariland SS3 holster. It has a level 3 security retention device. So what that means is there's a thumb strap that needs to be broken, there's a strap that's broken by the middle finger, and the gun needs to be tilted backwards and pulled out in that direction. Now, if you're working off something like this Uncle Mike's, there's a thumb strap. This is a level 2 or 3, depending on who you ask. There's a thumb strap, and the rear of the gun needs to be twisted towards the body as you pull it out. Some of them don't require that twisting motion. Then this thigh holster here is a Safariland that has a hood. You push down on the hood and flip it forward. Now, once again, no matter what your retention device is, the hand moves onto the gun, it defeats the retention device as it does so, forms a good grip, and pulls the gun out of the holster. One swift, quick move. Remember that it's very difficult to quickly shift your grip during the process of bringing your gun up on your target. So in general, however your hand is placed on the gun when it pulls the gun out of the holster, that's probably how it's going to be positioned on the gun during firing. If you get some terrible crooked grip on the gun, chances are your string of fire is going to be equally awkward. You can't adjust during the presentation. So get a good grip as you're pulling the gun out. When it comes to drawing, once again, you need to practice, practice, practice. You do this at home and it's free. I know it's boring, I know it's tedious, and it's not nearly as fun as sitting on your couch and drinking beer and eating Doritos. But if you're having difficulty passing this qualification, this is where you might be able to pick up some points, as a slow and poor draw has effects that just ripple down through every aspect of your shooting. And on top of it, it just might save your life at some point in the future. If you draw your pistol, during this qualification, you draw it 11 times. If you can shave half a second off of every single draw, that's 5.5 seconds of total time that you get back that you're allowed to take for your shots. And that's significant, and it can actually help you take more time and take more accurate shots. So remember, you gotta pay attention to how you draw your gun. Now, People will perform some sort of weird isometric push-pull movement when they drive the gun out to the target. They're pushing out with their strong hand while they're pulling back with the support hand at the same time. It's much easier to feel than it is to describe. I know people do this because they feel it's more stable and controlled, but what it is slow. So instead of doing this, think about literally pulling the gun outward with your support hand while you push it outward with your strong hand. So what this means is both hands are driving the gun out. One isn't driving it out and the other one's pulling it back. So you might be surprised how quickly and easily the gun flies out to full extension. I'm going to assume that everyone hopefully has a general understanding of sight alignment, but in case you don't, basically you focus on the front sight, you place it centered between the rear sight posts, you line up the tops of all three posts, you put the sight picture over the target, and you squeeze the trigger without disturbing the sights. It's easy to say, it's easy to understand, but somehow it seems like it's hard to do. The best way to get good sight alignment while you're pulling the trigger is to dry fire practice at home. It's free and it's going to help a lot if you're having difficulty. Once again, I'm probably going to do a more detailed video about this in the future, but there's plenty of other videos out there right now that you can reference. So we've had all this yapping and we haven't even gotten to the first string of fire yet. So let's get to it. Now the first 6 shots are going to be fired from retention at a distance of about 1.5 yards. So what this means is you're going to be drawing the gun and you're shooting from hip level without extending the pistol out too far from your body. This is supposed to be quick and dirty, so extreme accuracy is difficult and it's not necessary. The skills tested on the stage are how you successfully can pull the gun out and fire it as quickly as possible from the hip in a position where it's less likely to be grabbed or deflected by an attacker. Here we're going to employ the natural point of aim. It's a little bit different because your natural point of aim when the gun is extended is going to be different from when it's going to be fired from your hip. It's extremely important here, though, because you don't have the advantage of using your sights at all, or even sighting down the top of the gun in order to ensure that you're on target. So, what you need to do, line up your body, so when the gun comes out, it's going to be pointed at the center of the X-ring. This means left and right, up and down. Your body is going to be off-center from the target, so when the gun is held at your side, it's squared with the X-ring. What this means is if you're right-handed, and your gun's on your right side, you're going to be a little bit off to the left of the target. What that means is the gun is going to be in the middle, you're going to be to the side, and vice versa for left-handed people. Pull the pistol, brace your arm against your body. When talking about firing from a retention position, a lot of instructors are going to advise you to cant the top of the pistol away from your body in order to avoid possible malfunction that could be caused if the slide were to contact your body or your clothing. Personally, unless you're wearing a heavy coat, I think the risk of this happening is way overblown, but it's something to consider. Personally, again, I don't use this cant. The reason is the way the pistol is aimed. When you draw the gun and you hold it straight up and down, it's harder to move your wrist side to side than it is to move the muzzle of the pistol up and down due to your anatomy. Therefore, most of the error that occurs with these first 6 shots happens from either positioning your body incorrectly or you push shots up or down. The acceptable margin of error on the scoring rings is clearly bigger on the vertical plane than it is horizontally. Once you twist the gun on an angle, now you're opening yourself up to more of a diagonal spread, which doesn't help your score. So what am I saying? Basically, it's harder for you to be off to the left or to the right than it is to be off up or down. If you cant your gun, now up or down is actually a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right. And since the target is bigger up and down than it is across, I think it's in your best interest to keep the gun up and down. Once you're properly lined up, it's just a matter of pulling the gun and firing the shots. You try not to move your feet between the strings of fire. That way, if your first shot is off, you adjust before you take your second 2 shots. If your second 2 shots are off, now you can move your feet a little bit before you take your final 3 shots. If your arm is braced against your body and you're in a good stance, you bang these shots off you can do it in rapid succession. The gun is naturally going to come back to the same point of aim extremely quickly. And plus, you're less than 5 feet away from the target, so any minor deviation is fine. If the person scoring your targets uses the 5 ring for scoring, what you have is nearly 8 inches wide and almost 21 inches tall. Unless you make a significant mistake, you should be able to get nearly all 30 points for these 6 shots. For the next 2 strings of fire, you're going to be asked to draw from a holster and fire 3 shots in 3 seconds. This stage is often referred to as point reference shooting or point shoulder shooting or something similar to that. So what they're implying by calling it this is that you don't have time to use the sights. This is wrong. You may not have time to take a clean and precise sight picture, but you absolutely have time to get a flash sight picture. It's just a matter of whether or not you're able to do it. Probably the most important thing to consider with the stage is your draw. 3 seconds is not a lot of time, and that includes your draw. So if you fumble your draw, all the time that you lose is time that you no longer have to actually take the shots. If it takes you 2 seconds to get the gun out of the holster and up on target, you have 1 second to take 3 shots. If you can get the gun out and on target in 1 second, now you have twice as much time to fire the gun. As I mentioned earlier, there should be time for you to line up the sights. Shooting is a balance of speed and accuracy, and the faster you go, the less accurate you tend to be. The stage requires you to be quick. Fortunately, it also happens to take place at only 9 feet away. This means that the precision of your sight picture can be pretty low and still be considered acceptable for you to break the shot. Once we move back to 45 feet, you're going to need to be more conscious of your sight picture. But up close, put the front sight somewhere between the rear posts and you pull the trigger. This is probably about as good a time as any to address a topic that seems to confuse a lot of people, and that's this idea of double taps or controlled pairs or double pairs. No matter how quickly I personally fire 2 or more shots, I am always seeing a sight picture in between. If you can't see a sight picture before you pull a trigger, then you're just asking for an inaccurate subsequent shot. The idea that you're getting one sight picture and you're pulling the trigger twice is not the way to get good hits. It might work some of the time, especially when the target's up close, but you're much better off slowing it down just a fraction of a second in order to get that sight alignment correct. Again, in the case of the targets that are only 3 yards away, the sight picture can be pretty sloppy, but it's still there to the extent dictated by these circumstances. If you are able to get a good draw, you should be able to get nearly all 30 available points for the stage, considering how close the target is. Now the next 2 strings of fire are where the wheels start falling off for some people. This stage is usually referred to as a body armor drill or a failure drill or a Mozambique drill. What it involves is putting 2 shots into the center mass and 1 shot into the head area of the target. This is the only time during the entire qualification that you're going to have to transition between 2 distinct points of aim during a single string of fire. The anticipation of the headshot, along with the smaller size of the scoring ring, leads to some trouble with some people. The first time through, you're going to have 5 seconds and you're going to start from your holster. The second time you shoot, it's going to be shot starting from low ready, and you're going to have 1 less second to complete it. Both times you're going to be at 7 yards away. This isn't very far, but it's also not very close. So proper fundamentals are going to be important if you want accurate hits. Now, some people score the headshots differently. In general, like I mentioned before, shots inside the ring count for 5 points, while hits outside the ring but within the silhouette of the head are worth 3 or 2, typically 2. However, sometimes those 2-point hits, are worth nothing, as are hits anywhere else in the body. So regardless, the point is to make those 2 headshots count because there's 10 points on the line there. Now, that being said, there's 40 other points available to the body, so dropping those in order to make headshots is not a good plan. Another tip is on the second string. With the second string, you don't have to draw. So what you're going to want to do before the buzzer goes off is get as good a grip and stance as possible. Another tip is to bring the pistol up as high as the test proctor is going to allow. Some of them are going to allow a high ready position where you're almost sighted in, and others are going to require a low ready position. Some of them might even require that you pull the gun in towards your body. The closer you start to having your arms extended and the gun on target, the more time you're going to actually have to fire your shots. The next stage is going to involve some one-handed shooting. If this is somewhere that you know you're going to lose a lot of points, the only thing you do is practice. Dry firing at home is going to help a lot, but you're probably going to need to get some practice in with live fire so you can experience what it's like to control the gun under recoil with only one hand. The first string involves drawing, taking 3 shots with 2 hands, and then 3 more with your strong hand only. You have 10 seconds, and this is at 7 yards. The second string is going to be the same thing, except you're going to use your weak hand or your support hand instead of your strong hand. 10 seconds is plenty of time to take 6 shots. Places where you can get some free time will again be with the draw, but it's also with moving the pistol from 2 hands to 1 hand, especially when you go to the support hand. When you've got your gun on 2 hands on your gun and you want to move it to your support hand, do it fast. Don't waste time here. Get a good solid grip and then get to shooting. Keep your arms extended, move the grip, break the shots. If possible, don't lose focus on your sights during this transition, and definitely don't bring the gun back into the body when you transfer. Firing one-handed is just like firing two-handed, except it's not nearly as stable of a platform. Therefore, you're going to see some more wobble in the sight picture. If you spend too much time trying to get it perfect, trying to control that wobble, you're just going to run out of time before the stage is over. This is going to be especially true with the support hand. You grip the gun. It should be about the same with one hand, except you want to bring your thumb down a little bit farther and use it part of the hold. Many instructors will advise you to cant the pistol inward. We aren't talking about some sideways gangsta style, but rather just like a slight cant. I don't usually do this when I shoot with my strong hand at one single stationary target. I find that consciously tucking my elbow a little bit closer to the body while holding the pistol straight helps keep the muzzle tracking up and down instead of at an angle. But that being said, I do cant the gun when shooting support hand only because it helps pull the sight picture in front of my dominant eye. Additionally, if I'm shooting one shot each at a row of targets, I cant the top of the gun toward that direction that I'm moving, and it allows the recoil to help kick the gun over to the next target. But that's not relevant for this course of fire. The hand that is not on the gun needs to be pulled in close to the center of your chest. It's going to look very much like what the guy on the target is doing with his left hand. This position is going to help you stabilize your center of gravity by keeping your support arm or your off arm from wobbling your upper body around, and it has the wonderful benefit of making it impossible to shoot through your own hand, which sounds like a good thing. For this stage, we're going to start moving back to 15 yards. This isn't exactly a terribly long distance, but it's definitely long enough for your mistakes to be exaggerated and cost you points. If you were shooting group where the impacts were 5 inches across at 3 yards, that's going to open up to over 2 feet wide at 15 yards. So there is obviously a smaller margin for error. Here's where you're going to need to get a good sight picture and be careful when you're squeezing the trigger. This is also the distance where people start to lose the ability to clearly see the scoring rings. If up until this point you've been ignoring my advice about picking a recognizable aiming point between his fingers, you might actually start to cut the distance between the sides of the silhouette, which is not exactly what you want to do. And actually, it's at this distance that people start to forget about aiming at a point completely, and they just start shooting in the general direction of the target. If that's you, don't be surprised when your bullets start impacting off the bad guy. The first string of fire is shot in 10 seconds. You have 6 shots, and it's from the holster. There's nothing more to it. Take all 10 seconds if you need them, because you're not going to get any bonus points for finishing in half the time. A tip I would have here is clear the area of any spent brass before you start shooting, because you're going to be kneeling down, and if you kneel hard onto a piece of brass, it's not going to feel good, and it's going to be distracting before you start your next string of fire. After the buzzer signals the end of your 10 seconds, you're going to have to reload your pistol. Most times this is going to be done from slide lock on the clock, and you're going to have 5 seconds to reload and take a knee before your next 10 seconds starts. Don't panic, because 5 seconds is an eternity to do one reload and kneel down. And in most cases, the worst thing that's going to happen is that you eat into the time you have to take the next 6 shots from the kneeling position. Basically, before you get started, be aware of where your spare mags are located. You keep them oriented properly in the holster, and be quick about kneeling down. I'm going to put together a future video about speed loading a pistol as well. Before taking your next 6 shots from the kneeling position, make sure that you take an opportunity to reacquire your good grip on the gun. You should have time to make this adjustment off the clock before your 10 seconds starts, but if you don't, you still need to take the time to do it. These shots are taken from a ready position, so you're going to have more time since you won't have to draw. Personally, I find that the most stable position to shoot from when I'm trying to quickly kneel is to put my strong side knee on the ground and keep my support side knee up, and I use it as a support to brace my support arm. But there's countless ways you can do this. Some people prefer to put both knees down, others sit back on one foot or both feet. Find whatever works for you and feels the most stable. In the case of shooting this qualification, you're not going to have to kneel down and get up too quickly. In a real life defensive situation, this isn't exactly going to always be the case. Other than that, shoot your 6 shots from the kneeling position just as you did from the standing position. All the same caveats about sight picture apply. And if when you watch this video, your first thoughts are, man, that guy's going to shoot his camera, then you probably need to work on your accuracy and fundamentals. There are 12 shots and 60 points available for this stage, which is nearly a quarter of all available points. There's nothing special about these 2 strings of fire, but if you mess them up, there's potential to lose a ton of points. Here we are, final stage of the qualification. These 2 strings of fire are going to involve shooting from behind a barricade. The only difference here is that you're going to be leaning out from both sides of cover. You're going to have 20 seconds to complete each of these strings. What that means is time will absolutely not be a factor here. Essentially, if you can't shoot 4 shots in 20 seconds, you're not going to be able to shoot them in 20 minutes, so don't sweat the time. I think that the reason why you have so much time here is because this stage used to be fired at 25 yards away. Most contractors shoot it at 15 yards, which I believe is why you have more time than you actually need. FPS federal officers, I think, still shoot it at 25. In either case, it's nothing more than a slow fire accuracy test. You start from behind cover. Do not crowd cover. There's this tendency for people to get right behind cover because they feel like it brings them closer to the target, or it makes them more safe. I'm not sure. However, when you're right on top of it, you're going to have to move awkwardly to the side, and the barricade itself might interfere with your draw. Step back when you draw, or before you draw, and then you can step up and diagonally. Also, personally, I would avoid using the barricade as a brace for your hands or your arms when you shoot. I'm just using some cardboard here to represent a barricade since I don't have a better one. So I don't personally have that option anyway, but there's a good chance that the cover you're going to be using is going to be some sort of wood or metal barricade. There is this temptation to use the edge to brace your hands. At 15 yards, I think this is unnecessary. The sideways pressure it keeps on the gun makes it track in a weird way during recoil, and it's a bad habit to stick your pistol out beyond corners in real life. However, if your barricade is very stable and you feel like you need to do this in order to be accurate, then go ahead. Remember that this is only a qualification course and it's not real life. Be aware, though, that many well-used barricades have bullet impacts along the edges, so there might be splintering or jagged sections that are going to cut your hands or arms when the gun recoils if you're pressing hard against them. Before the buzzer, once again, clear your floor space of empty brass. Then you draw. You lean the body out to the side just far enough to see your target. You very methodically take your shots. Don't forget that you have forever and a day to make good, solid hits. Take a knee quickly and do the same. When you're leaning outward, you'll possibly naturally cant the gun in the same direction as the lean. If you need to do this, then do it. If you can keep both the gun and your head upright, it'll often help keep the gun tracking straight up and down during recoil. I find the gun cants a lot more when I lean out to the support side for some reason. It happens to a lesser degree when I'm kneeling on that side because I'm not leaning my upper body as much. You have 8 shots and 40 points available on the stage. Once again, you've got forever and a day to shoot it. You need to try to get as many of those shots as possible. Okay, folks, that's about it. Hopefully you were able to put all this together and get your magic number of 200 out of 250 points in order to pass. More importantly, I hope I've convinced at least some of you about the importance of maintaining good, solid firearm skills when you're in this line of work. Not everyone who carries a gun for work is going to be a gun person any more than you're some sort of aficionado of OC or baton or handcuffs. However, you owe it to yourself and the people around you to maintain some level of proficiency with your gear. If you'd enjoyed this tutorial, please comment, like, subscribe. Hopefully I'm going to put out more videos like this. Thank you, folks, and stay safe.